At 3:00 a.m., rain needled the windows of Ethan Ward's seaside mansion, and the old hallway clock hit 3 like a gavel. I was still in the kitchen with a damp cloth when little Liam's cry tore down the corridor, so I ran barefoot past family photos and a portrait of his late mother that always seemed to watch over the house. And when I shouldered into the nursery, I saw a baby burning up, and 5 professional nannies with their suitcases, already zipped heels pointed to the door. And yeah, that happened. They were leaving while a child shook with fever. Ethan burst in behind me, voice hoarse, offering double, triple, anything, but... Brooke talked about exposure. Risk, Jessica muttered. Scope of practice, Sophie said. Insurance wouldn't cover infectious disease, Laura warned about careers ending. And Monica looked him in the eye and said, it wasn't about money. It was liability then. The front door clicked like a vault shutting, and the house went quiet in that way that makes your breath sound loud. I'm the housemaid. Emily Torres, not a nurse, not a specialist, just a woman who grew up learning how to cool a forehead when the pharmacy was a bus ride too far, and I heard myself say, Mr. Ward, let me help, he flinched. Logic warring with love. But Liam reached a trembling hand toward me, and that decided it. I moved slow, changed the sweat-soaked onesie for dry cotton, opened the kettle to warm the air, laid tepid compresses on wrists and ankles, a fresh cloth at the nape. No ice, no shock, just steady coaxing. And I hummed the tune my mother used to hum when the night felt bigger than we were. Ethan stood at the threshold, asking if I was sure, and I said yes. Breathe with me in and out, count to 4. I logged every temperature on a notepad, because paper helps when fear is louder than truth. By dawn, Dr. Miller arrived with rain on his coat, checked Liam's lungs and pulse, nodded at the compresses, and said some things no school can teach. He called it instinct, I call it love, that knows how to wait. Liam's fever softened, his fingers unclenched, and Ethan looked at me like a person instead of a position. He said, stay officially, not as the housemaid. As Liam's caregiver, I told him people would talk, and he said they could talk. He saw who stayed 2 weeks later. The mansion learned how to breathe again, sun in the kitchen, oatmeal on the high chair. Silly songs that work when nothing else does, Liam's laughter in the hallway. That used to echo, and you know what I mean. How a house can feel brave again. Then the cars rolled up, 5 of them. Doors opening, the way trouble opens. The same women walked in with folders and lawyer words. Amanda, the ringleader with a polite smile that could slice glass, said they'd consulted the Department of Child Services, that entrusting a child to someone without certification violated safety standards, that if anything happened, Ethan could face negligence and endangerment. Jessica chimed in about a child needing experts, not sympathy. Laura slid her card like a chess move. Sophie crossed her arms, and Monica asked what the press would say about a millionaire giving his son to a maid. I held Liam tighter and said nothing, because there's a kind of quiet that refuses to beg. Ethan didn't raise his voice, he simply said, the night my son needed you, you left, and that was the end of our meeting. Except it wasn't a glossy magazine hit the stands with a long-lens photo of me in the garden, and a headline that tasted like rust. Billionaire entrusts his son to a maid. A dangerous experiment in emotion and negligence. And the talk shows called The Comment Sections did what comment sections do. Ethan's biggest partner put a collaboration on hold. He killed his phone, jaw tight, eyes tired. He told me we'd write it out. Then the inspectors came, clipboards, soft voices, sharp eyes. I showed them Liam's routine nap. Log meal, log medicine records, pediatric notes, the compress method, the songs, the play blocks he likes. One inspector crouched and asked Liam if he felt safe, and he pointed at me and said, Nana, the woman, smiled and said she saw no neglect. In fact, she saw real love they left. Peace lasted a day, then more leaks, more rumors. Suddenly the bureau was back with that neutral face people wear. When they're about to do something that will hurt, they said. There was new evidence and they needed a temporary separation to assess undue emotional influence. I tried to stay calm while my hands shook. Liam understood only arms. He wrapped himself around my neck and screamed my name, Nana, over and over until his voice broke. I told him it would be quick. They took me to an evaluation center with beige walls and a window that faced a brick. The interview room had 3 officials and 2 attorneys who weren't supposed to be there, except they were. Amanda sat with them, polished and smiling. She cued a short video, and there I was on the screen holding Liam after a nap, while Ethan leaned down and hugged us both. The footage had been taken from a hidden camera they'd planted before they left. She called it proof of an inappropriate relationship. They used phrases like blurred boundaries and unsafe attachment. They asked how often I was alone with the father, and whether I accepted gifts, and why I took the role without credentials. I said, because a baby cried at 3 in the morning, and 5 experts chose their suitcases. After the session, a supervisor slipped me a note. Ethan's handwriting. Keep your faith. Everything is about to change. I held that paper like oxygen, and while I sat in a room that sounded like a clock, Ethan met with his attorney and pulled security footage from the mansion. He found audio from a cafe where the Nannies had been, and when the public hearing opened, cameras murmurs the kind of bright lights that make you forget how to swallow. The 5 of them presented their edited clips, screenshots, fabricated texts, the whole theater. I sat at the back with my hands clasped and a prayer with no words. Then Ethan walked in with a hard drive, set it down, and said, before you condemn the woman who stayed, watch. What the ones who left said, when they thought no one could hear, the screen flickered to the mansion living room, after they'd packed jokes about liability. Someone saying if the boy crashed, it wasn't their fault, my name tossed like a punchline. Then came the cafe, audio clear as water. Amanda laying out how to plant a story, how to call it soft neglect, how to feed a headline. About a maid playing mommy. How the press would pay. If it bled, the room went quiet, you could hear a pen drop and maybe a few consciences trying to stand up. The bureau seized the drive on the spot, withdrew the separation order, and officers escorted the 5 out a side door. Ethan's lawyer announced a defamation and invasion of privacy suit. The outlets that had dragged us started drafting. Apologies. A reporter asked if I had anything to say, and the only words that showed up were simple. The truth can be buried. Love keeps digging. They let me see Liam before the microphones. He barreled down the hallway and collapsed into me asleep before I could sit, like his body finally settled its debt with rest. That night, the house felt different again, not richer, just right, like rooms exhaled and walls stopped, bracing for impact. Cinnamon in the morning, bright crayons under the table. A father who looked less haunted. It could have ended there. But life likes unfinished edges. A week later, a policy memo made the rounds proposing that in high-profile households, no unlicensed caregiver could serve as primary in any circumstance, even with parental consent, even in crisis, even when it's 300 a.m. And 5 professionals have walked out. The memo used words like uniformity and best standards. It did not use words like courage or midnight or alone. Ethan pinned it to the fridge with a seashell magnet. Liam asked me what I would have done if that rule had already existed. I said I would have done what I did. I would have held the child and taken whatever charge came after. He nodded like a man choosing which fights are worth losing. Friends over people ask if I forgive those women. I'm not the judge. I know pain makes people do ugly math, But I also know a credential that requires you to abandon a sick baby to protect your license is a credential that needs a spine transplant. Say I was reckless, say I was right, say both, I can take it. Just don't forget the kid at the center of everyone's arguments. The last thing I'll tell you is small. There's a rocking chair now in a little room off the kitchen. A hand-carved sign above it that says, "When it's 3 a.m., we choose the child." Sometimes a neighbor drops by to leave a meal. Sometimes a nanny who stayed for a fever at a stranger's house sits and cries into her coat because no one wrote her into a headline. We drink peppermint tea and swap the dumbest songs that saved the longest nights, and the lake stops sounding angry. For a while, if you were here, you'd understand why I'm telling you this the way I am. Plain, a little bruised, but steady. Because I want you to feel the floorboards under your feet when the choice comes, and it will. So tell me in the comments, was I right or reckless? Should a parent be allowed to choose an unlicensed caregiver in a crisis? Should a rule like that memo ever stand? Have you lived a night where the paper on the wall and the human in the room pulled you in opposite directions? Take your story, your fire. And if you believe truth and love deserve a vote when policy gets written, hit subscribe so we can keep this conversation breathing.